All right. Welcome to another edition of the Expert Q&A with Gradient Works here. So we've got Jamie Edwards who's joining us today. So Jamie, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and your role?
Sure. My name is Jamie Edwards. I am currently the Senior Sales Operations Manager for Upwork. I've been in the role now for about a year. I've been doing sales ops now sales ops and sales for just over 15 years, with the vast majority, about 12 years of that specifically in sales operations.
Cool. Okay. So one of the reasons I wanted to have you on to talk was I know that, in your career and probably fairly recently, you've gone through some kind of hyper scaling type situations where you're bringing on a lot of new reps and really expanding. And so I thought we would really focus our conversations on scaling today. So I know that you like to break things down around people, process, and technology. I've heard you say that more than once. So I think that's a good place to start, right? So why don't we, as we do this and kind of break it down into those chunks, let's also talk about both, the sales teams themselves and then the sales ops teams, because obviously you have to scale up ops to support the sales organization as it grows. So let's start with people. So one thing I think about a lot when you think about scaling a team is you've got to bring on a bunch of new folks. You've got to onboard those folks. You've got to enable them on something new. So what are the types of strains you see in those things when you bring on a bunch of people, and what have you done to address that?
That's a really good question. So when I think about this question, I actually think about it in two ways. It's kind of the post-COVID world, and then the kind of
Sure.
new environment that you're dealing with this. So I think the very first thing that you do whenever you're looking at scaling and bringing people on and kind of like that enablement piece and how you plan for that is really just sitting down with your leaders, whether that be on the sales side, ops, marketing, and understanding exactly what the end goal is. So a lot of times when companies are doing this, you're working in reverse. You kind of have like, hey, we want to sell 200 deals. Last year we sold 100 deals. So how many new reps do we need in order to scale that up? How many new leads? How many new everything else? So when doing that, it's critical to bring in kind of your training team and understanding what that looks like, what the current training process looks like, how they interact with the people. And especially when you start thinking about that kind of looking at, you are going to be scaling up both sales and sales ops. So when you're bringing these people in, will they be sitting in the same training class? Will they be listening to content that is drastically different? So it's really having a plan and working with all of your partners to make sure. So one of the things that we've done over the last few years is making sure that it's very content specific. What are the things that they need to know? What are whether it's how to do dial blocks or cadences, or just making sure that they're armed with the right information. That's been key to being able to scale pre-COVID, and especially now when you don't necessarily have everyone in one room. You might have a situation where you're dealing with 10 new hires all over Zoom. So making sure that they've all gotten their laptops and they're signing
Right.
So I think that's probably where I'd go with that.
Okay. And so, that's post-COVID is obviously a huge challenge. Maybe without necessarily going too far into specifics, I'm curious, did you have to make a lot of adjustments to the way that you did onboarding? Was it very specific, like everybody get in a classroom before and now it's very distributed?
That's exactly what happened. We went from a situation where the majority of our sales staff was here in the Chicago market, which is probably something I could have said. I'm in the Chicago market.
Right.
So it's one of those situations where a lot of our sales onboarding happened here. So you'd go into a large scale room and you got to meet everyone and you talked and you went through the process. And now as we've kind of transitioned and have really started to drink our own Kool-Aid and really go into a remote first environment. It allows for us to hire all over the place, which also means that you're going to have sales reps who may be in different states or doing it from their own homes here in the Chicago market, but you have to kind of plan for that. So you have to make sure that people have all the supplies that they need ahead of time, and not just maybe a day before, but making sure that maybe a week before, which is something that you didn't really have to worry about when it was more so like, hey, if someone doesn't have their login or their badge doesn't work when they get to the office, we can figure that out over the course of a couple of days.
Right.
That's not the case when you have reps who are needing to make sure that they can log into their computer or have a computer to participate in those Zoom classes, because if you don't, then they're just behind, and it's really hard to get people caught up if that's the case.
Sure. Okay, that makes a ton of sense. I think that's one of the consistent refrains that we've heard in a lot of our conversations is just the intentionality of having to do things ahead of time, having to have a better plan, having to manage people more closely. All of those things have been these kinds of themes from this post-COVID world that we're living in. So, kind of switching gears just a little bit, I want to talk about not just the onboarding and the initial enablement, but one of the things that happens with a lot of scaling is that the team is constantly changing. The team you have next month is not the team that you had the month prior, right? So what lessons have you learned about team design, and both from a sales team and an ops team perspective, and how that has to evolve as the team gets larger?
So I look at this, or I will say the things that I've learned are drastically different when looking at those two things.
Okay.
We know
All right.
that turnover in sales is turnover in sales. There's
Sure.
a thing that you kind of expect to happen.
Mhm.
Whereas in the ops world, you're hoping that your turnover isn't nearly as close to the same. So
Sure.
I think when you're designing out your sales team and you're looking at that, one of the things that you're kind of hoping to do is put a process in place. You want to make sure that as that turnover happens, you've built contingency plans in place. So you know what happens when someone leaves, what needs to happen with their book of business, or what will happen with the lead routing, whether it's pausing lead routing or being able to transition books to a manager, or distribute that book amongst other members of the team, or even in some cases, kind of having a placeholder in place so that when the new rep who's coming out onto the floor, they will just inherit that book. So it's really about going back and making sure that you have your plan in place and that you are sticking to that plan and that everyone understands what that plan looks like from the top down. I think on the ops side, one of the things that I learned, and I can definitely credit you for helping to teach this to me, is having people that you trust and trusting the people that you have. On the ops side, I can specifically talk to when I took this new role. I was informed very early on that I had another role that needed to be filled, and so I immediately went through my Rolodex to figure out like who do I have that I trust, that I know that I can bring in and do the work, and that can help me get to that place that I wanted to be within the company and get us kind of rolling in the right direction. So that comes with just building up trust and learning what people can do, but then also not taking too much away from the team that you may have already in place and pulling it over to the people that you already trust. So making sure that you give all of your performers, all of your players a chance to really step up and take some ownership and leadership in certain processes. I love football. I love football analogies. And it's kind of like you can be a great quarterback, but if you don't have and if you don't trust your offensive line, you're not going to step into those passes. You're not going to do all the things that you've practiced all of those days throughout the week. So trusting the people that you have on your team, and then also making sure that you're surrounding yourself with people to trust.
Okay, makes sense. Well, let's move from people to process. Let's talk process a little bit. So, again, when you're adding a lot of folks on the sales team, and you're kind of dealing with that, one of the biggest challenges I see with that is managing territories and account allocations, and how do you ensure that everybody's got the right book? How do you plan for that ahead of time, and then how do you manage that process as you go? So, in a world where you're adding reps really, really quickly and building to a plan, I would assume, I hope, how do you manage that process and keep territories clean and fair, and everybody having a shot at what they need to be effective?
I feel like this is the part where everyone like leans in intently to hear what is about to be said, because I think
Sure.
that's probably the biggest struggle that every
Hmm.
company has, no matter if you're a multinational company or a small startup.
Hmm.
Segmentation is hard, whether you're doing it based on employee size, industry, geography. Um, there's so many questions to answer. Are you handling this as a top-down org where a company like Disney, where it has all these small subsidiaries, ESPN or Marvel Studios, are they all part of one hierarchy? Are we breaking those up? So it's really making sure that you get. I feel like you're laughing because we've seen this before, but
Sure.
you get with your leadership team, and you really talk through what is the intention of this plan. Like, do we want to go verticalize? Are we saying, hey, we want to have an automotive vertical, we want to have an IT vertical, a healthcare vertical? And we're strategically planning out our business around the known accounts that we have within our CRM system, or are we going in with a totally new plan? Are we going to segment this by employee size? And if so, again, are you taking those account hierarchies into effect? I think one of the things that I've learned over the last year is you have to have a plan. Like, you have to. If you don't, all of these things will eventually bubble up. It leads to a lot of unforeseen, or what turn out to be unforeseen issues. But if you had planned intentionally in the first place, you really get to avoid some of that. So I would definitely say going into it with a plan, understanding what your business goal is, and sticking to that. You will still have one-off issues that pop up, but it's a lot easier to solve for those one-offs than just going out and saying, hey, I'm gonna build a book by just giving a person a random number of accounts and hoping for the best.
Sure. So, I mean, having a plan, I think, is that makes a ton of sense. That's obviously critical. Is there anything you can share, especially for folks who are maybe in a growth stage right now with their companies and trying to kind of figure out maybe how to move from sort of a get it done pure startup mode to more of a growth with a little more process mode? How do you actually go about making that plan effectively, especially if you don't have a history of having made that kind of plan before at your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first question that I ask is, what is it that your business does, and does it operate across multiple industries and departments, and kind of going from there. If the answer is yes to that question, that very first question, which is yes, we can operate in any industry. That opens you up to a lot of different options. You can
Mhm.
do a lot of the different things that we talked about. You can go verticalized and say, hey, I want to structure my teams in this way. I've never been a huge fan of verticals, because if that industry starts to struggle, like if you have a collapse of the automotive industry,
Mhm.
you have an entire segment of your business that all of those teams are going to struggle across the board. So what I like to do is intentionally um, give a little bit of everything, sprinkle in a little bit of healthcare, a little bit of IT, a little bit of this, and maybe doing that across segments of business lines. So you're small to understanding what you consider a small to medium business,
Mhm.
what you consider a mid-sized business, mid-market, maybe less than 1,000 employees, and then looking at what you consider your large market cap. So plus 1,000, plus 5,000. And making sure that you have the right salespeople to be able to dive into those. So you're probably going to put more of your senior sales force on your large accounts, whereas you can have someone maybe 2 to 3 years into their sales career working your mid-market style companies, and then kind of so on and so forth down the line.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go into, I think, the everyone's second favorite challenge, aside from territory planning, and talk about rules of engagement and issues that crop up around that, and some related things, like approval processes and those sorts of things. Just all the nuts and bolts of making sure things run smoothly. How did those things get tested in a scaling environment?
Wow, how many ways can we talk about this? I think one of the biggest things that happens when you're scaling a business is you go from maybe having a small number of reps who are calling into a small number of accounts or an infinite number of accounts, but the chances that there's that crossfire is kind of limited because of all of its white space. As you start to scale and grow and you start adding more people in, everyone kind of has that same hunter mentality. So you have so many people who are pulling in these new locations or new accounts, which aren't really new accounts. They are part of already historically either spending or someone who's already deep in on the into their pipeline on that account. So it's critical to kind of have a plan in place for what your rules of engagement strategy should be. I think first, you look at your segmentation rules, kind of going back previously. If you have two reps who are arguing about the same account or two managers who are arguing about the same account, the first thing you're looking at is, does it belong in both reps' segment? And if not, then that's a fairly obvious kind of solution right there. Hey, if this is out of your segment, it belongs with this rep. Where it starts to get a little bit trickier is when it's within the same segment. And that's where you start looking at kind of how the reps have been working those accounts. So whether or not someone has already put someone into a cadence and made 10 to 15 dials and done emails instead of meetings and set an opportunity. Like, you're looking at all of those things first. And then you're making the understanding that someone just pull in a new lead and then just make a call. So again, it's a lot of nuance, and it's a lot of you having to actually do the work of looking at who did what and when was it done and when was the email done. So it's a lot of hunting that information down for either the sales manager or for someone on the ops team. But it's something that just has to be done.
Yeah, I think that's always the challenge, because at least in my experience, reps can become very, very good lawyers suddenly when a discussion comes up where something needs to be adjudicated from an ROE perspective, and they often can make a very compelling case. And so your point about the idea that all the white space, the amount of white space starts to shrink, right? So the likelihood of some kind of an overlap or some kind of a conflict just increases as you increase your sales team. Given that the likelihood is sort of a function of how large the team is, as the team gets larger, these conflicts are just going to multiply. So how do you create something that's scalable, but also perceived as fair by the reps? I mean, that's a big question. I think we all tried to thread that needle, but it can get challenging if you've got 50 different adjudication requests that you have to track down every single email on. So how do you create scale for these types of things?
I think the right answer, which is, it's funny that you use the word fair, because I don't think fair and right are always the same thing. So I think the right answer is data integrity, like going through and trying to keep your CRM system as clean as humanly possible, because what that does do is it gives you kind of a clear line of sight, especially when you're looking at accounts versus leads or contacts. It's a lot easier for us to say, okay, I can identify when this account was created, when this came in, when this lead came into the system, who was the owner of this lead, and kind of track down step by step what actually happened there. And what that then gives me the ability to do is find out that one rep who, as much as you want to shake that rep's hand and say, you know what, you went out and you did the dirty work. Like, you set the meeting and you made the calls and you got this person interested in everything else. I can also look in the system and see this lead was never in your name. Like, this contact was never there. You never went through the steps of trying to get this account switched over to you. You just went rogue and decided to do the thing that was going to help get you paid. And as much as you love to see that hunter mentality and that person who is willing to win, it's one of those things where you have to make the right decision, where you're like, hey, by the rule of law, by the thing that we've actually written out here for our rules of engagement, you didn't own this account, you did all the work, and now this person's going to get the credit for it. The hope there is that that doesn't happen too often, and that enough people see that that actually is the way that it's going to go, and that you know, they are deterred from doing it. But I feel like we've seen enough across many years that it's worth the fight sometimes, because every once in a while you get that one through where they see it your way, or there's enough lobbying to say, hey, we're going to move this account, and that will always be a challenge to try to solve for.
Yes, it will, I'm afraid. Okay, so let's talk about the technology side of things now. So, you know, as you're scaling, you know, obviously underlying everything is the CRM, but there's a lot to the revenue tech stack these days. I mean, you can every single person on the sales organization probably has 3 different SaaS products at least that they're using on a daily basis. So what kind of changes have you had to make on the technology side in terms of you know, making sure that reps are able to use the technology effectively, that you're able from an ops perspective to use the technology, and that it's actually supporting what you're trying to do and what your growth plan is? How have you had to address and change things on the tech side of the world?
Love this question. So the one thing that I would probably add to it is not just what we've changed, but what we've learned.
Okay, sure.
We've learned a lot. And one of the big things that I think I've learned is there's always something better.
Sure.
Whether it's true or not, going back to that, yeah, you know, that can be here or there, but you're always learning that there's something new. And I think just because something is new, you have to understand what you're going to be losing by just bringing on kind of a new tool or looking at the newest tool. Understanding how a tool was designed to work versus how it works for your business. And that's something that I think a lot of companies don't really take to heart. Like they think that the tool is designed specifically for them, and that the company is building this thing for them, not understanding or not taking those blinders off for a second and saying, this company has X amount of other clients that also have other needs. And, you know, this tool was designed in a very specific way to do a specific thing. And now you are either having it to fit into your process or you're making it fit into your process. So I think what we've really started to do is evaluate how we use tools, why we're using the tool, and does it fit the needs of our sales force as a whole. Understanding that there will always be gaps and there will always be challenges, but trying to work within the bounds of what that tool was intended to do, along with how we use our CRM system.
Okay. Well, let me take one little kind of branch from there just a little bit. What, you don't have to name vendors if you don't want to, but I mean, what do you think is the core set of things you need in your technology stack as you scale? I mean, I would say obviously it starts with CRM, but what do you know, kind of what do you layer on top of that? You know, things like everything from like knowledge management systems to, sales, automation type tools, that kind of thing. What do you see as core of the stack?
Oh man, I, I think you nailed a few there. I think now, especially being in a world that I don't think will ever go back to quote unquote the normal, I think we are now in a place where remote work and more of a fractured work environment will be more of the norm moving forward. So I think making sure that you have a high quality telephony system,
Mhm.
it's key. Being able to go back and make sure that your reps aren't having lags in their calls and their dials and things like that. A cadence management system,
Mhm.
having something that you can easily track and hold your reps accountable to. That's providing you with enough information and enough just core data to make decisions as you move forward. Um, I think all of these are crucial. And as you scale up a company, especially once your company becomes that medium to large size business, you do need a lot of learning management systems in place. Because one of the things that you learn, it's easy that first, or I don't want to say it's easy. We've learned very well how to do that initial training, where we start to see those knowledge gaps and the fall through on things are, hey, I haven't sold a deal yet. How do I process something through, whatever CPQ vendor that you're using? And
Mhm.
that becomes the challenge of like, do you have the time to one-off train all of these people who it may be 2 or 3 or 6 months before they sell their first deal?
Mhm.
Or do you have an LMS system that's in place where you can easily say, hey, go take this training, or hey, go watch this video. And it's so much easier for them to go in, and it's so much easier for you to go back and track and see who's watched the video, who's going in and clicking through, how much time they spent on the video before they've sent your ops team or your managers 15 emails saying that the system doesn't work and here's why.
Right. Right. Okay. Cool. So I just want to kind of wrap things up here a little bit. So I think a lot of folks who will be watching this are probably entering into a rapid scaling phase. They're maybe hitting the knee of the curve with their startup, something like that, or they are dealing with some level of growth. And as we all know, sales teams tend to grow and change, and there's a lot of churn generally. But what's the one piece of advice that you would give somebody who's in a sales operations role, who's dealing with rapid growth or just rapid change in their sales organization?
Two-part answer, but both very simple. Um, don't freak out
Okay.
and plan to change.
Hmm.
Um, the plan that you put in place today will not look the same as it will in 6 months, and that plan definitely won't look the same in a year. Um, and you need to be comfortable with that. Be comfortable with change. Um, Understand that that change isn't happening because of necessarily something that was done wrong, but it's new information. Every single day, as you sell more deals, you know what? You're going to learn that this is your key persona in different companies. And so, therefore, your lead scoring will change. You will need to change the way that you route leads because you realize that maybe what you want to do is focus more of your higher level people on higher level personas. You may find out that you need an internal inbound team versus just doing completely outbound sales. All of these things can happen overnight. Every day you will learn something new. So just be prepared to change and just embrace it. That would probably be the biggest piece of information I can give or advice I would give for anyone getting into their ops career.
Sure. Uh, I actually want to take that a little bit farther for a second, because this is something that I think is really fascinating about ops, because on the one hand, you have to be very flexible, you have to adapt, because trite or not, change is constant, right? It is, things are always changing, right? But on the other hand, your job is operational excellence, right? So doing the same things really, really well to a high degree of precision and efficiency. So how do you? I've always seen those as sort of dual mandates for operations, right? Be able to change on a dime, but also do everything you're doing today really, really well, right? So how do you balance those two operational mandates?
Um, I think of it in the way that I would if I was asked to build a roller coaster.
Okay.
All the roller coasters are going to be different,
Hmm.
but the experience is going to be the same. You're looking for um, those big highs, those big lows, and still having the safety. Like that's the thing. You're trying to keep them
Sure.
safe. So I always see myself as that person who, with ops, we are the guardrails.
Hmm.
We understand what generally will and will not work. Um, Eventually, a sales leader will come to you, or someone in marketing, or someone in product, and they will come in and they will say, "Hey, here's our idea, and this is the thing that we want to do, and this is how we want to make it." And you say, "Awesome. Let me tell you what we can do with that right now." So it's never saying no, but it's explaining what you can do.
Okay, makes sense. All right. Well, to wrap up here, I always like to ask, folks who do the Q&A, do you all have any open roles? Are you hiring right now? And if so, how could people find out more?
We are. You can find us at upwork.com and check out our career section as well as on LinkedIn. Our career section is always being updated.
Awesome. All right, Jamie, it was great to talk through this. Thanks for sharing everything about scaling. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you having me.
All right.
Have a
Thanks.
great one.